North Carolina has implemented transformational reforms in the last decade that have created more opportunities for more people than ever before. The John Locke Foundation's Becki Gray, who is Senior Vice President, well, she's been at the table, in the trenches, at the forefront, advocating for Locke Foundation policy recommendations. In fact, she's been doing that for more than a decade. Interesting, she is going to be speaking on Monday here at the John Locke Foundation about the 2019 year, different victories for freedom, and how it all works and looks for 2020, particularly in this hyper-partisan political environment. In fact, Becki says that we sometimes forget fiscally sound public policies that promote free markets, limited government, and more are really the foundation of good government. Becki joins us now. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Donna.
All right, so 2019, a whole lot of things went on at the General Assembly. You were there blow by blow, but it's interesting that your recap of the year really shows that there has been a multi-year advancement of freedom and liberty, starting with respect for North Carolina taxpayers.
Exactly. And Donna, when we look back, and if you take just 2019 to evaluate what the conservative policies went forward, what wasn't, it's only part of the story and part of these really transformational reforms, as you mentioned. Since 2011, we have drastically reduced taxes, made the tax system fair. We have reined in the growth of government, much more sensible. We've saved money rather than have, we not only have extra money, we've got money to put aside into savings. We've also rolled back regulations. We're making better, smarter investments in education that impact kids in the classroom, and then better investments in infrastructure across the state as well. 2019 continued a lot of those, but it was a very interesting year and different over the last decade because of the political makeup that we had this session. Of course, we have a Democrat governor, we have a Republican General Assembly, but they no longer hold the supermajority. So the governor's veto was much more powerful this last session in 2019 than it had been in the past. As a matter of fact, Roy Cooper has vetoed more bills than all previous governors combined. That gives you an idea of this, again, very controversial,
It was pretty contentious for quite a long time.
It was very contentious. And the other thing, in the introduction, you mentioned there was a lot that happened in 2019. There was a lot that happened, but there was really very little that got done because of this divide and Roy Cooper stopping so many things. He vetoed the budget this year, and there's been a lot of talk about that. Let me just remind our listeners and remind all of us, Governor Cooper has vetoed every single budget that the Republicans have put into place since they have been in power. The difference this year was there was not a supermajority of Republicans. He held that Democratic caucus hostage through this whole session and, really made them declare loyalty to him and the party over their constituents. So this is the first year in my memory that we have gone into the new calendar year without a budget in place.
Becki, you mentioned the issue of sound fiscal policies, and despite the vetoes and the back and forth over the past few years, we definitely have seen the Republican-led General Assembly really rein in that spending growth and focus on savings. And sometimes people might think, well, savings, yeah, you can do that. That's kind of, the icing on the cake. But boy, did we see that become really, really important when we had storms, hurricanes, and a lot of North Carolinians in need. That money was there, set aside to help.
Yeah, the money was there. And, $2 billion, that's about 10% of our whole budget. It's the highest it's ever been in state history. And, as a matter of fact, when the Republicans were doing this and taking some of that surplus money, may come as a surprise to some folks that the John Locke Foundation, rather than saying, let's take all of that money and give it back to the taxpayers, which is part of this, but we were really at the forefront of saying, what we need to do, what's really smart is to put money aside in a savings account. So, like you said, if we need it, it's there. And we think in terms of having that money set aside for, as you mentioned, a natural disaster, the hurricanes that have hit the eastern part of the state. We've had storms and flooding in the western part of the state. We had some money there to get people back up on their feet, to get businesses back and running, to get people back to normal. But the other reason why that's so important is when we have an economic downturn, and we don't know when it's coming, but we know that it is coming. North Carolina is really well positioned to weather that kind of storm. And this is probably going to happen, things totally out of the control of North Carolina lawmakers. This has maybe coming from a national perspective, international perspective, but it's still something we're going to have to deal with. And with this kind of savings aside, we have money to get people back up on their feet. At the very least, we can pay our bills, we can pay our teachers, we can pay our police officers, we can keep government going without going back to taxpayers who are struggling through economic downturn and asking them to send more money to the state. So reining in that growth of government to a really efficient, effective level and having that money set aside so we can meet our obligations when we may need to, I think is one of the smartest things and one of the smartest reforms that we've done. Talk about good policy. This, in my view, and all of this together has made North Carolina a national model. But I don't think that we talk enough about the significance of setting that money aside and how important it is to have that savings.
And while that was all going on, the savings, the reining in spending growth, really planning for the future, there was also a concerted multi-year effort to make sure that working North Carolinians were keeping more of what they earned through changes in tax policy. And that's happened for several years. Really important.
It's very important. And Donna, it's something that just seems like a sense of fairness and transparency and openness and expectations for government. But the other thing is it's a real different way of looking at things, that if people keep more of their money, if businesses are able to keep more of that money, well, if people are able to keep more of that money, that means they can spend a little bit of extra over the holidays. They can invest in their homes. They can do home improvements. Businesses can buy a new computer. They can buy a new pickup truck, or they can hire a new person. And so that's the way, and we've seen this really illustrated over the last 10 years. This is the way that you grow an economy. This is the way that you get people back on their feet.
Now, Becki, on Monday, you're going to be talking at noon at the John Locke Foundation about some of these same issues, but also looking ahead to 2020. By the way, folks, if you can't make it to Raleigh to actually hear and see Becki in person, we'll be live on Facebook. You can check us out there. Becki, give us a quick sense of 2020. What are you expecting?
Well, we got two things going on here, Donna, that are related but separate. One is the preparation for the election. And, of course, we now know who is running for all of the offices in North Carolina. We're looking at those. A lot of conversation about which races are important, which are competitive, looking at national influences. How is that going to affect the election in 2020? But don't forget, we also have another short session that's scheduled, that they're coming back in just about 10 days for the first phase of that. We may very well see the budget overridden during that time, but then we'll have the short session, and there's going to be some policies and some things that are discussed. And of course, we'll be keeping up with all of that at the Locke Foundation and through Carolina Journal. But, we have another session to get through and some things of looking at continuing the momentum that we've done, really addressing some health care issues is something that hasn't been addressed as completely as we believe that it should be. And
so Becki Gray will be there at the legislature as it all takes shape. And of course, you can follow her on Twitter as well, at Becki Gray. That's Becki with an I, and also at Carolina Journal and at John Locke NC. So you can keep up to date on what is happening, what the policymakers are doing in your name and with your money. Becki Gray, thanks so much.
Thank you.